And from the makers of Planet America, we're proud to present the Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz the Chazello.
So much to chat about this week, Chaz. Kennedy says Biden is the real spoiler and he should stand down, while Biden says marijuana should be considered a less harmful drug, begging the question, are these two issues related?
And I'm going to be looking at the racist tirade that wasn't. But first...
Week 3 of Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York, and the novelty of seeing a former and possibly future president of the United States facing 34 felony counts has quickly worn off. Also wearing a little bit, Judge Juan Merchan's patience with the defendant.
Donald Trump looked relaxed, giving reporters a fist pump even, after being found in contempt for violating a gag order aimed at protecting witnesses and jurors in this case.
The judge warned Trump he could be immediately thrown into jail for contempt of court, although instead he imposed the maximum fine, which is only $1,000 for each offence, so a total of $9,000. Chump change for Trump. After last week's enlightening testimony from former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker about his deal to help Trump win the 2016 election by buying and burying negative stories, including Trump's alleged extramarital affairs, this week it's been generally less eye-catching. Trump's former executive assistant, Rona Graff, was a pretty unwilling witness. Banker Gary Farrow talked about the nuts and bolts of making the payments via Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen. And we're still to hear, of course, from Cohen himself or from star witness Stormy Daniels. And reporters almost seem to have been as bored as Trump himself, who they say just keeps nodding off in court.
I would say they've tried a number of different devices to keep Trump awake, partially in response, or what appears to be in response to collective press corps observations. So, for example, when there are sidebars, an attorney doesn't leave his side anymore because leaving him alone means leaving him to potentially sleep. He has a stack of papers with him at all times now to go through. But neither of those things seem to have protected Trump from his own exhaustion today. More than not, when I looked up to see how Trump was receiving the testimony, Trump was not receiving it at all.
And not only that, when Trump nods off, there are reportedly some repercussions, at least according to left-wing media agitators Midas Touch.
There are people in the courtroom who are aware of the fact that Donald Trump was passing gas during the jury selection process and while trial was taking place, that there was a putrid odor that has been surrounding Donald Trump in the courtroom, and as he was sleeping and closing his eyes, he would kind of pass gas and fart in the direction of his lawyers, who are kind of revolted by him. And
the very idea of a flatulent former President Trump has tickled many fancies online, including former Democratic strategist James Carville, who's now calling on his fellow Democrats to make some noise of their own on the subject.
I can do an underarm fart, all right? But the point is, don't pass this opportunity up, because it's a golden opportunity, because these people are farting into the future.
And by the way, the fact-checkers at Snopes decided to try and sniff out the truth of the matter, but disappointingly they found this claim of a gassy former president to be unproven, at least thus far. Prosecutors continue to build their case, meanwhile, trying to prove through financial statements and recorded phone calls between Trump and Cohen that Trump knew exactly what was being done and how shell companies were set up to try and hide the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. But so far, Chaz, a lot of talk about sleeping and farting.
Yeah, look, I'm surprised that we went there, but I'm glad we did, because it does set up something that I'd like to talk about, which is regards to the contempt hearing before. We've talked about the fact that Trump only got fined $9,000. There was no jail time. There's a reason that there was no jail time, which I think is worth discussing. Yeah. The first of which is people know that Trump is taunting the judge. Oh, can't throw me in jail, like as if he wants to be thrown in jail so he can be a martyr. I don't know if he actually wants to be thrown in jail or not, but at least he can act like he does.
He's already been likening himself to Nelson Mandela if he gets sent to jail. Totally,
but there's another aspect to this as well, and that is I think the judge has concerns about the fact that something that Trump has said repeatedly, which a lot of people have ignored, is correct, and that is Trump has said over and over again that why do they get to attack me, but I don't get to attack them back? Like he says, it's unfair. It's usual kind of complaining. But in this case, there is some truth to this, and that is that no, Judge Merchant's daughter is not attacking Trump, and that she is one of the people that he's gagged against. But he's also gagged against criticising all the witnesses. And one of the witnesses just won't shut up. And I'm referring there to Michael Cohen, who quite literally, on the subject of farting, tweeted out the other day, "Hey, Von Schitzenpants, your attacks of me stink of desperation. We are all hoping that you take the stand in your defence." He's just taunting Trump. Now, obviously, the reason he's doing that is to troll him because he wants Trump to snap, because he wants Trump to A, be thrown in jail, and he also wants Trump to lose his case.
Yep.
And so now that's really, really bad stuff. And I don't know if I don't know why the judge hasn't explicitly hauled Michael Cohen in and said, you are committing contempt of court by fooling around with this trial. But that's not on, that kind of stuff. And that is part of the reason I think Judge Merchant doesn't want to throw the book at Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it is all very silly and childish. It's schoolyard name calling, but why there isn't a two-way gag order, basically to say, Michael Cohen, you can't comment on the case either ahead of or even after you've appeared as a witness. You have to wait until the conclusion of the trial. That would seem to make sense. So this, yes, it is only a one-way gag order. Clearly, there is not much of an appetite to pursue the matter very far.
Yeah, but I just want to make one more point, and that is this is a talking point. You're probably going to hear a bit more. When in terms of the theory of this case that Trump misdeclared hush money payments to Stormy Daniels as legal expenses, right? It was pointed out this week by Rich Lowry at National Review that back in 1992. Bill Clinton, the Clinton campaign hired a law firm as an intermediary to pay off a private investigator whose job it was to hush up the many women claiming that that Clinton had an affair with them. And that was declared as payments to a law firm as legal expenses. Now, that's not exactly the same thing as has happened here, but history's rhyming at the very least. Yeah,
for sure. And obviously this wouldn't be the first time that Trump supporters have said, hey, look at Bill Clinton, look at the stuff that he did. But it's also not unusual to have lawyers working on opposition research for the campaign to say, you dig into our candidate and find out what you can and maybe get ahead of the story. But yeah, interesting point from Rich Lowry. But Democrats hoping that once Donald Trump went on criminal trial that voters would start abandoning ship might be feeling a bit disappointed this week. If you look back to the day the trial began, April 15, Trump was only fractionally ahead of Joe Biden in the average of national polls from Real Clear Politics, but now he is 1.5 points up. Not massive, obviously, but heading in the wrong direction if you're a Joe Biden supporter, that is for sure. Also not looking good for Joe Biden right now, the five-way national poll average, including the Independents' Robert Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West, as well as the Greens' Jill Stein. Trump is leading there by 2.2 points. While Kennedy's 10 points in this average of polls makes him now the most popular third-party candidate in more than 30 years, since Ross Perot's first tilt in '92. Kennedy, of course, is nowhere near to winning a single state or an electoral college vote in a three-way or five-way contest, but still he maintains that he is the only candidate who can beat Donald Trump now. And this week, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. called a press conference to present polling commissioned from John Zogby, a longtime progressive pollster, which says it is based on a survey of 26,000 likely voters and shows Kennedy defeating Trump. Admittedly by the slimmest of margins, though, and this poll is also, it's a bit odd, it awards Utah's 6 electoral votes to Kennedy. Now, that'd be a stretch. No Democrat has won Utah since Lyndon Johnson's landslide of 1964. Before that, it was Harry Truman in '48. This same poll, by the way, had Biden losing to Trump. It does give Utah to Trump, plus Virginia and Wisconsin. So on the back of that, Kennedy this week had a proposition to make to Joe Biden and Democrats, what he is describing as a no-spoiler pledge to defeat Trump.
Pledge that I offer to take if President Biden also takes it. Both parties agree to co-fund in mid-October a 50-state poll with 30,000 or more likely voters, so this is essentially effectively zero margin of error. Both parties, that would be President Biden and myself, pledge that whomever performs weakest against President Trump in a two-man contest will drop out of the presidential race. So this is a spoiler pledge.
It's a small point, I suppose, but once again, the Kennedy campaign staging and tech is just terrible. He was just this sort of shadowy silhouette throughout the presentation. They should call it the no lighting pledge. The Democratic Party, though, immediately dismissed this idea of a no spoiler pledge out of hand. Trump isn't impressed either. He's stepping up his attacks on Kennedy over the last week or so, while still failing to understand how capitalisation is supposed to work.
He's a radical left lunatic whose crazy climate change views makes the Democrats' Green New Scam look conservative. He's polling badly, 8% at best, but says he does well against Crooked Joe and me, 1-on-1. Wrong. He gets trounced.
Actually, a quick fact check on that. In some polls, RFK is getting 18 or 19%. It's not 8% at best, it's 10% on average.
Sure. Okay, I've got a few things to say about this. The first of which is, okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, you could just parachute RFK in where Biden is.
Yep.
I find very easy to believe RFK would do better than Biden. He's not 170 years old. He's quite likeable. He's got a lot of things going for him. He's got a lot of things going against him as well, but I could totally see him doing better than Biden. But you can't parachute someone in like that. It doesn't work like that. Biden exists, okay? So in the real world, this is an idiotic idea. Let me count the ways this is an idiotic idea. Number one, in mid-October, they're going to drop out. They started voting a month earlier than that. Like mail-in voting, absentee voting, that happened long before then. Secondly, Joe Biden is going to spend, his campaign is going to spend the next 6 months winning votes. They do ground game. They spend $1 billion in advertising. RFK has none of those. None of those advantages. Joe Biden is running a limousine campaign. RFK is running a matchbox car. If he just in mid-October just became the only opponent to Trump with no money and no ground game, Trump would annihilate him because Trump will have spent the last 6 months doing that as well. So that's the next thing. Thirdly, that polling, come on, we've got our own polling. Like, they're acting like we don't have polls. The swing state polls exist, and they don't look anything like that Zogby poll there. Like, and the idea that Biden is going to win Michigan and lose Virginia, I don't think much of that polling. Right? Okay, so there's that as well. The other thing is, RFK, he's at a high watermark at the moment because he hasn't been softened up yet. Joe Biden and Donald Trump have been softened up plenty. If RFK actually does well, he's going to have $1 billion of ads heading his way, negative ads, right? And that is something that he's already gone down heaps since November and December. He put out an ad this week. All the polls he cited were from November last year. There's a reason for that. His polls are going down, and they're going to keep on going down as people run negative campaigns on him, and they will. Because all the polls I've seen, whenever people bring up vaccines and autism and stuff like that, his poll numbers go down. Yeah. So it's going to come.
Well, you're probably right to assert that. It is not a certainty, however, that this is the high watermark for Kennedy, because we have seen the level of dissatisfaction with both Trump and Biden. And remember, how did Donald Trump rise up in the first place in 2015? Because people looked at Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush and said, oh, please, another Bush, another Clinton. High levels of dissatisfaction opened the way for Donald Trump. Everybody sat back and said, this must be his high watermark. He's gone to the front in the Republican polls in August of 2015. He'll implode. He won't even make it to the Iowa caucuses in January. Oh, don't worry about him. It's going to be somebody else. Well, it wasn't. And he defied political gravity. Robert Kennedy, he is another kind of Trump. He is all name recognition. The Kennedy brand is is as strong in politics as the Trump brand was in reality TV and pseudo business deals. Kennedy could defy political gravity in quite the same way. He could be a lot more resilient. He could be doing what Ross Perot did briefly in '92 and coming first in a three-way poll with the other two major candidates. It is not impossible.
We don't even know RFK is going to be on the ballot in most of the states in October. So right now he's on 4 states, okay? He should probably spend his time trying to get on 20 states or 30 states before he starts telling Joe Biden to drop out, who, by the way, is on 50 states ballots.
One last point to make about Kennedy this week as well that hasn't got enough coverage, I don't think, in this debate as to who is he a spoiler for, who is he a stalking horse for. Kennedy outed himself this week as the anti-Trump candidate. I'm here to beat Donald Trump. I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump. I think, in fact, Donald Trump wins after this week because Robert Kennedy, not that there was any great doubt, but he has tipped his hand somewhat. He is an anti-Trump candidate.
That's a great point, and that's bad news for Biden.
Exactly.
Yeah. I will say this, though. RFK is right about one thing. Biden definitely has polling problems.
He does.
Gallup this week put out this quarter's average approval rating for Biden, and he compared it to other presidents at the same stage of their presidency. It isn't pretty viewing for Joe Biden. Biden has the lowest approval rating by such a long way over the last 70 years. And yes, politics is different now than when Eisenhower was around, but Biden's approval in the last quarter was 8 points lower than Trump's was at the same stage. And the bad news from Gallup didn't end there either. When asked what the most important problem facing the country was, immigration is still the top response for the 3rd month in a row. Now, we probably should combine the economy line there and the inflation line, and then they would be 30%, which is higher than immigration. But it's not like that's great news for Biden either, talking about inflation. And Biden wouldn't like the staying power of that immigration issue at all, I suspect. I think he would have been expecting it to drop down by now. Although it is a bit weird as an issue, an Axios Vibe survey found 51% of Americans, including 42% of Democrats, said they would support mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. That is Trump's policy that Democrats are supporting there, at least 42% of them. But 58% of them said that they supported legal pathways for orderly immigration, and 46% said asylum seekers should be protected if their cases are legitimate. Those two are Biden's policies. So make of those vibes what you will. I'd say those vibes are confused. Gallup had some awful news for Biden on the economy as well, with their economic confidence index falling 9 points in the last month. That's the lowest it's been since last year. What did Biden do to Gallup this week?
Not good numbers.
No. Finally, really interesting poll from Harvard about 18 to 29-year-olds. People love to assume they know which issues young voters care about. We'd like to assume that. But Harvard asked them to name the 2 issues they cared about the most. Results? Surprising. At the top of the list, very normal-looking issues. Inflation, healthcare, democracy, that kind of stuff. The only issues that seemed targeted to young voters there were guns, maybe abortion. Look at the issues lower down the list, though. All the so-called youth issues, climate change, down the list. Then way down the list, Gaza and student debt. The 2 issues that we assume that young voters are obsessed by. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. Could be an outlier. Who knows? But I just think it's worth looking into that more because that is an interesting result. And really, to be honest, any reaction to that is better than old mate James Carville's message to young voters about what might happen if Republicans win.
If they get a hold, there will be no government left. There will be no rights left. You'll live under theocracy. You'll end up with Christian nationalism. But that's all right, you little 26-year-old. You don't feel like the election's important to me. They're not addressing the issues that I care about.
Maybe they shouldn't put that as an ad on TikTok, John.
I don't know, the raging Cajuns down with the young folks. Reports from the Associated Press this week suggest the Biden administration is pushing ahead with a plan to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug, but that it would not legalise marijuana outright for recreational use. Instead, it will move marijuana from its current classification as a Schedule 1 drug alongside heroin and LSD to a Schedule 3 alongside ketamine and some anabolic steroids. Marijuana is legal for medicinal use already in 38 states and for recreational use in 24 states, about half the country. And the industry is worth more already, the legal industry, $30 billion a year in revenue, and billions of those dollars go to the states now in taxes. There's also a thriving black market, and this federal change is going to ease restrictions, sure, but it will still require licensing of dispensaries as if they were a pharmacy. And it's not too cynical to say that this change, which is going to take months to work its way through the system, does seem to be a pretty clear play for that youth vote, Chaz.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure it's going to do much for the actual youth, even if it wins some votes. Let's start with what this decision actually achieves. Two things, basically. Number one, it eases some restrictions on the studying of marijuana, and it gives companies that grow and sell marijuana a tax break, because you can't legally deduct business expenses when selling a Schedule I drug. So until now, marijuana sellers have been paying a super high tax rate. Great. Well, what doesn't it do? Firstly, it does not legalise marijuana federally. So even though the feds are unlikely to prosecute sellers, every time a shop sells or distributes marijuana, even in a legitimate business, they're committing a felony. The reason that matters is because banks are not going to provide financial services for a technically criminal enterprise. So that means marijuana stores have to rely heavily on cash, which is inefficient, makes them sitting ducks for robbers. None of that is good. What's more, it's also a broken promise.
Decriminalizing marijuana, automatically expunging records for marijuana conviction.
And so is the second part of that clip. Biden still has not expunged the records of people convicted of merely possessing marijuana. He did pardon thousands of people for federal marijuana possession offences, but they'd already served their time. And since their records weren't expunged, they still kept their criminal records. And what that means is that will then follow them around when they're trying to get a job or lease a house, all kinds of things. Bottom line, John, the change might sound good, but it's not making a huge amount of practical difference.
No, indeed, it's not. Well, for more, we're joined by Kevin Sabet. He was an advisor on drug policy to 3 American presidents. He's now president himself of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM. Kevin Sabet, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Nice to see you, John. Thanks so much.
What practical difference do you think this is going to make? The Biden administration is stopping short of full legalisation. What are the practical implications then?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of differences that it will make. The first being political. This was probably done because it's perceived that young people will come out and vote. It's an election year, so the timing is quite interesting on that front. The other practical thing it will do definitely is give tax breaks to the marijuana industry, because there's a specific provision that says that they can actually deduct ordinary business expenses, especially advertising, commercialization, promotion, and those activities. And that's actually why I think it's quite worrisome. I think it may really speed up and supersize this already pretty big industry in the US that really cares more about profit than it does health.
So do you think Schedule 3 is about right for marijuana, or maybe marijuana shouldn't even be a controlled substance at all?
Actually, I think it should be Schedule 1, and let me tell you why. With the current scheduling system, Schedule 1 means that it has no accepted medical use, and there is no approved drug that's called marijuana. It hasn't gone through the proper classification. Now, I would actually reschedule it, frankly, if I had my druthers. I could rewrite the Controlled Substances Act. I might call it a Schedule 1A or 1R, meaning it doesn't have that, but it should be researched, and we should increase the research for it. But you don't have to reschedule it to increase the research. In fact, there's a big question mark whether this will increase the research at all, because really what increases research is money and investment. So I worry that today's marijuana is not your old Woodstock weed. It's not 3% THC. It's up to 99% in a lot of, in many products. And that's a result of the legalization. The sort of good old American capitalism and ingenuity has unfortunately created really, really dangerous products. And so I think that's why it deserves a Schedule 1 classification. It doesn't mean we should lock people up. It doesn't mean we should throw them in prison. I don't think we should. We can decriminalize the use without commercializing sales.
How worried should people be in legalised marijuana states about it still being illegal federally? Is there any chance at all of someone in California pursuing a perfectly legal activity, but then still being prosecuted anyway by federal law enforcement?
It's a good question. I mean, because Schedule 3, these are illegal drugs still. And especially Schedule 3 marijuana there's no prescribable product called marijuana. So other Schedule 3 drugs include prescribable products like, let's say, anabolic steroids or some depressants, pills, ketamine, which is a sort of hallucinogen, was used in veterinary, but now used in very limited sort of PTSD settings. Those are approved drugs. And marijuana is not an approved drug. So now you have states that are selling a Schedule 3 drug. In theory, you could use this as justification to actually do more prosecution. I'm not sure that's going to happen because, again, this is more of a political issue now in this country than it is really one based on the law or based on science. But one thing I do want to say is that, unlike a glass of wine or a bit of a cigarette or something, we're seeing really, really bad outcomes, especially when it comes to psychosis and schizophrenia for today's highly potent marijuana.
And Kevin, what are the implications of this reclassification for the illicit trade? Is it going to make any difference in terms of potential penalties they could face?
Probably not. It's not going to make a big difference with penalties. That's the interesting thing, is that it's touted as social justice, but it's not going to do one thing to get anyone out of prison, to give anyone an expungement for their record, or get anyone a pardon or anything like that. So it doesn't touch that. It very lightly touches on very extreme trafficking penalties in terms of the differences. I don't really foresee any real practical difference at all from a penalty point of view.
Now, Biden keeps saying that he's expunged the records of people who were convicted of federal charges of possession of marijuana, but he hasn't. He's just offered them retrospective pardons. So why do you think he hasn't just simply expunged their records?
Yeah, I think that would be a much more sensible thing than doing what this is with Schedule 3. But expungement, they sort of think that they've checked the box, I think, on that, and now they're sort of they get to say that they're going to go further. I think they're, in some ways, again, it's sort of like I think they're okay with the perception being that this is sort of legalized and quasi-legalized, like that. This allows them to check the box without really fully legalizing it federally, which would be a real headache to do. You'd have to create an entire regulatory regime. It would be a very rigorous process. And I think this is sort of, in their minds, maybe a middle ground between doing nothing and legalizing. Is, we'll reschedule it, and people will think it's sort of quasi-legal anyway. I think that's really what they're aiming to do.
And marijuana's been around a long time. People would assume that all the research that could be done into marijuana has already been done, but that is not the case. So what kind of research into marijuana do you think most needs to be done?
I think what most needs to be done is what is happening in the medium to long term with our brains when it comes to these highly potent products. These are relatively brand new products, and we have allowed them to be released with really no testing at all for safety. It's really unbelievable if you think about it. And so that is what I think is the most pressing need for research, is the higher potency products, because it's unknown right now.
And one of the arguments we are hearing in favour of this reclassification, Kevin, is that it will make all research into the effects of marijuana, be they positive or negative, easier to conduct. Is that your expectation?
I hope that's going to be the case. I really want it to be the case. I'd love something good to come out of this in my mind. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to look 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years after, if it does get rescheduled finally. And we're going to say, well, what happened? There was supposed to be all this research. Research is happening mainly through, investment. And I don't know if this is going to spur investment and funding from the government. Maybe, I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see more research on it. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Now, you've expressed concerns about the higher concentration product that's on the market at the moment. What's the marijuana-related reform that you would most like to see the government implement right now?
I'd like to see a mass awareness campaign about the current harms of marijuana. There's so much disconnect. There's such a disconnect, I should say, between what people think they know or what they experienced in college or uni, whatever, and then what the science actually says. There's so much misperception. And, I think it has to be done carefully, because it shouldn't be reefer madness. It has to be done in a balanced way, a science-based way. But there's got to be just some more awareness at the very least, so that people who use marijuana know what they're getting themselves into. I think we're going to open our door to a lot of lawsuits here in the future for liability. We've seen this with tobacco. I think we're seeing the same thing with marijuana. This is really a big tobacco 2.0 sort of all over again.
So, Kevin, you were the drug policy guy for 3 American presidents, and you clearly don't think this is good drug policy. But what about the politics of it? Does this represent good politics?
I actually am skeptical even of that. I mean, at the very least, that, it should work politically. It's like if it's going to do anything, at least, it could help some people, I guess, in some way. I actually don't think it will. Let me tell you why. I think when you look at the polls and you look at, there was the most prominent is the IOP Institute of Politics, Harvard poll of young people and the issues they care about. This was the poll that folks were talking about because it showed that the, care for like Palestine issues was much lower than sort of the perception. It was like number 14 or something out of 15. Marijuana didn't even register in the top 15. It wasn't even a concern in terms of a reason why people would vote. Of course, young people are much more in favor of legalization than older people. There's no doubt about that. Frankly, as you get older, as you have kids, as you have responsibilities, you realize, being stoned all the time maybe isn't the best, plan. And so the people's views change. But the reality is, it seems like support is sort of a mile wide and an inch deep. It's just not deep, and it's not a reason why people would be, running into the polls to vote for someone that they weren't already going to vote for. I don't see that moving the needle at all. I do see the marijuana industry and sort of the pro-marijuana folks, wishing that it did and saying that it does, so that it gets the politicians on their side. I don't think we're going to see practical evidence of this.
Kevin Sabet, thank you for having a fireside chat with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now to Capitol Hill, and Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is planning to fulfill her promise to try and oust fellow Republican Speaker Mike Johnson next week over his support for federal budget measures and that foreign aid package. But it's not going to work because Democrat House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has promised to save Speaker Johnson's gavel.
House Republicans are either unwilling or unable to get Marjorie Taylor Greene and the extreme MAGA Republicans under control, and so it's going to take a bipartisan coalition and partnership to accomplish that objective.
But it is safe to say that old Madge isn't well pleased with that and thinks that instead it would be a better idea if Mike Johnson just quit.
Mike Johnson can do some really, he can pray about it, think about it all weekend, do the right thing and resign, giving our conference time to elect a new leader, a new Speaker of the House. He should reject the endorsement of Hakeem Jeffries and the entire Democrat leadership team. That is not an endorsement that any Republican speaker should ever want or embrace.
But what is a little bit weird about that, Chaz, is Taylor Greene and her compadres are claiming to be preparing House Republicans for the triumphant return of Donald Trump in January next year, and to make sure that this time President Trump gets what he wants from Congress, unlike last time. Yet Trump himself has been offering Johnson his support, and he does seem quite happy for things to settle down, at least for now.
Yeah. Journo's asked Marjorie Taylor Greene about that exact point directly. Was she not defying Trump's wishes by undermining Mike Johnson?
Former President Trump has said positive things about the Speaker and has said he doesn't favor a motion to vacate. Aren't you defying former President's wishes?
Absolutely not. I'm the biggest supporter of President Trump, and that's why I proudly wear this MAGA hat. I fight for his agenda every single day, and that's why I'm fighting here against my own Republican conference to fight harder against the Democrats. Mike Johnson has fully funded the Department of Justice that wants to put President Trump in jail, giving him a death sentence.
Whoa. Marjorie Taylor Greene takes hush money payments very seriously. Death sentence. Anyway, while she was on a roll with her novelty cap-based rhetoric, Greene once again focused on just how much she hates Ukraine funding.
And that's when Mike Johnson fully joined the disgusting business model of Washington, D.C. to fund forever wars. Yeah, that's what this is. The Uniparty is Make Ukraine Great Again. The Uniparty is all about funding every single foreign war. They think this is the business model that needs to be done.
She really showed that photo.
She sure did.
Yeah, look, basically, the only thing that matters here, I think, are the numbers in that vote next week. Mm-hmm. If the Democrats basically make Mike Johnson their pet, then he's got a problem.
Yep.
There ends up being 400 votes supporting Mike Johnson. And so far, only 3 people have publicly supported Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion. If they're the only ones who vote to get rid of Mike Johnson, it's just going to be embarrassing for her.
Yep.
And we might actually open a chapter in the next few months where Congress might not be insane.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Democrats are already saying, well, OK, we've pledged to support Johnson next week, but what do we get in return? So they're looking at what concessions they can get and using this for maximum leverage. It does remind me, though, of all the stories that you hear from people who have worked for Trump in the Trump organisation and the Trump administration, that it is always lots of little competing power centres, all saying that there's, trying to sort of get the ear of the boss in Donald Trump. And so it's fascinating to see now how everyone in Congress on the Republican side is revolving in this orbit around Donald Trump, trying to please him, trying to position themselves for greater influence into the future, including Marjorie Taylor Greene clearly thinks that she should be the next Speaker of the House if she's not Vice President of the United States. I don't think she's going to get either at this stage, but still, we'll wait and see what happens next week.
We shall. It was January this year, and the city of Baltimore was rocked by yet another hate crime outrage at a local school.
Pikesville High School's principal, Eric Eiswert, is in hot water over an audio recording making rounds on social media containing racist and anti-Semitic comments.
He needs to be removed from the school ASAP.
Davina McCain's son is a student at Pikesville High.
But to hear him say that about kids, that's horrible. I mean, absolutely horrible.
So what did the principal say exactly? Well, this is the recording that showed up on a local Instagram account.
You know, I seriously don't understand why I have to constantly put up with these dumbasses here every day. Between these ungrateful black kids who can't test their way out of a paper bag, or these teachers who don't get it, how hard is it to get these students to meet their grade level expectations? I'm just so sick of the inadequacies of these people. And if I have to get one more complaint from one more Jew in this community, I'm going to join the other side.
Now, the principal denied that that was him, but he was removed from the school pending a police investigation and, well, everyone moved on to the next social media outrage. Except this story wasn't quite done yet. Cut to last week.
We have now conclusive evidence that the recording was not authentic. The results of the analysis indicated the recording contained traces of AI-generated content. It's been determined the recording was generated through the use of artificial intelligence technology. Through their investigation, detectives alleged Mr. Darian, who was the athletic director at the high school, made the recording to retaliate against the principal who had launched an investigation into the potential mishandling of school funds.
Yes, it turned out that that school athletic director had allegedly framed the principal. He was charged with disrupting school activities, theft, retaliating against a witness. He supposedly made that recording to save his own job. The principal initiated an investigation into him. Apparently, he was about to sack him, and so this was the only way out for that guy. It's all very interesting, but here's the main thing. We've now arrived at the point where even audio that's not particularly sophisticated, just from some athletic director, can fool people. Even if the person making the video doesn't put a lot of effort into it, it's still good enough to get a principal suspended. So what do we do now? This is a question that Professor Oren Etzioni has been asking for some time. He's an artificial intelligence expert. He's also a Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington. Most importantly, he turned up, and I spoke to him earlier. Professor Oren Etzioni, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
So I understand why the Baltimore recording fooled so many people, but to be frank, I'm sure you could tell it was fake when you heard it. I certainly could tell it was fake when I heard it. But how long until even a well-trained ear will not be able to tell that an AI recording is fake?
We've just seen studies that show that something like 50% of the time, even today, people get it wrong. So when you look at videos and images and audio, trying to guess whether it's correct or not, whether it's fake or real, is almost like flipping a coin. And so, sure, here you have an amateur and it's kind of garish and outrageous, But the fact of the matter is that the technology has reached the point where we can no longer tell whether it's real or not simply with the naked eye or the naked ear.
Now, I know you've put out some AI tools, detection tools for free that people can use, so thank you very much, that's nice of you. How long until the best internet detection tools aren't good enough to be able to tell whether something is fake or not?
So first, thank you for mentioning that. We are at truemedia.org and the service is free, so I'm not selling anything, and it's equally available in Australia as it is in the United States. And you're right, we're in an arms race. So they're making the generation tools better, and we're making the detection tools better. And frankly, they have more funding. As a nonprofit, our funding is limited. However, the problem of generating fakes is a harder problem than the problem of detecting them. So right now, we are doing better than 90% accuracy. It's not perfect, but it's good enough that it's extremely helpful if you run across something suspicious.
How much of a problem is the opposite? People identifying something as fake when actually it's real? Because I imagine that could be just as dangerous.
You're absolutely right. There's a name for that. People have called that the liar's dividend. Sometimes we catch politicians in what's called a hot mic moment, right? We hear them saying something they shouldn't have, or we catch them on video, on tape, doing something they shouldn't have. Now, one of the defenses, and it has been used, and people say, oh, that's a fake, that's not real. So again, our tools are also important in identifying, no, this is real. You can't get away with saying the AI did it.
So how in the medium term do we solve the problem of deepfakes? Is it just a matter of this arms race continuing on and we just get better and better tools, or is there some system we can set up which can help us determine what's fake or not, like a verification system or something?
Unfortunately, like many problems in the world of the internet, there is not an easy solution. So we can make progress with something called watermarking, which basically means that what you see is signed, and that tells you what the origin is. We can make progress with detection. I think the most important thing is to educate people. Don't automatically believe what you see or hear. Ask yourself, what is the source? Where did it come from? Did it come from ABC, a reputable organization, or did it come from a friend of mine across social media, Facebook or what have you? And that friend might be a wonderful individual, but they themselves may have been hoodwinked. They may be passing along something that's suspect. So I think we're going to need to learn to think of not just about what is it that is said, what is it that we see, but who said it and how sure are we of the source.
Now, obviously, the concerns about fake audio and fake video are clear to everyone at this point in time. But the cutting edge of technology is always well ahead of where we are in the public conscious. So you know about technology. What will we be worried about next after we've stopped worrying about deepfakes?
Well, something that we ought to be worried about, and most people are unaware, is even in conversations, in meetings, and so on, where we think we're interacting with somebody, is it a fake? So, for example, you think you're talking to me, Professor Oren Etzioni, in the United States, but how do you know it's not a fake? It's not a fake video. We've seen actually instances. There's a famous case in Hong Kong where a financial executive was hoodwinked out of millions of dollars for his firm because he thought he had an order to transfer money. We've had romance scams where people get on dating services and they're thinking they're talking to an attractive member of the opposite sex, and they're really talking to a fake. So what's coming soon is not just the social media, but fakes in real time.
Professor Oren Etzioni, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us on the Fireside Chat.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Are you sure that was really the professor?
Oh, God.
That's it for another Fireside Chat. We'll see you on Wednesday night for Planet America, 10 p.m. on ABC TV, and anytime you like from 9 p.m. on ABC iView.
We're going to be back for another chat at the same time next week, and there's also the Planet Extra podcast pep right there. See you there.
Bye-bye. Bye.